We'd like to thank Mainspring Companies for sponsoring Season 1 of The Next Entrepreneur. Mainspring celebrates the entrepreneurial journey, and we are very grateful for their support.
I'm thinking, I don't think I want to really do this. I don't know about this guy. I don't know about this whole thing. I don't know if I want all my eggs in one basket either. My wife and I are working for a startup. We have 2 young sons. I felt like I needed something more stable than that. And then, but then I also thought that if I were going to roll the dice on anyone, I should be able to roll the dice on myself.
Right.
And what is it if you don't believe in you, how can you expect other people to believe in you?
Hello, and welcome to the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew McClendon, and I am proud to have a good friend here with me today, John Davidson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, John, normally we do our podcast in a studio in Baton Rouge, right? We have a little podcast studio there, but because of the coronavirus situation, we hadn't been there in a while. But my producer set me up with a traveling kit. I've got the camera, the tripod, mic stands, audio equipment. So I'm able to go around and do these traveling podcasts, which is really cool, but it makes me the producer for the day. So I'll do the best that I can. The good thing is that Daniel will be there to edit it all up. So, John, I've known you for about 10 years now. Through our church in Austin, Unity Church of the Hills. So I'm glad you're here today. I know you to be a very successful person in every aspect that I can think of. But you are the president and founder of GlobalStar Consulting here in Austin. So why don't we start off by you telling us what GlobalStar is and what you guys do?
GlobalStar is a software consulting firm. And in particular, what we focus on is what they call enterprise-wide solutions. The acronym is ERP. And they're companies that develop the software. And what we do is we take on the services portion of a project. We help a client move from an existing legacy type system to a newer, higher grade of software with additional functionality. It's what we do. And it's all back office. It's all in the financials area, the supply chain area, and HR payroll.
And so does that involve placing personnel?
It does.
And is that, so like you would place maybe programmers or administrators or into a company's office?
Yes, but mainly what we do, and we do have developers, programmer types, and we do have system administrator types, but for the majority of the work that we pick up now, and really has been this way for a good while, is more on the business analysis side. They call it more like a functional business analyst. And what the analysts do is they have, in terms of their background, they are not only experts in the software. Most of them have been implementing the software, this particular software, which is Infor, and they've been implementing this particular software solution for 15 to 20 plus years. But they also have the business acumen, the background from a business standpoint. So they've been on the other side of the table that the clients are on that they're working with. And so, for example, someone may be an HR payroll consultant and an expert in the software, but they've also been a vice president of HR payroll for a company. Right. So that's kind of how it's set up. So we do go on site and we help clients not only understand the software and the nuances of the software and how to optimize the software, but we also help them reevaluate their processes and where they can what they call it is business process reengineering. It's an older term in our industry. And so you help a client re-engineer the processes to where they can adapt their business structure or their business basically their way of doing business and approaching business, they can adapt that to the software instead of adapting the software.
So you started your business in 2000, right?
Yes.
But right around the time, or right after the time, wasn't there the .com bust?
It was right around that time. I had been a part of a startup that did this type of work. The company's called S3G, and S3G. I was there for about 7 years, and at S3G we did again this type of work, and we hit the kind of meteoric rise of the Y2K bubble, and the owner of the company, he did really well because he sold during that time. And then after that happened, I took over running the company. We had a couple hundred people there, and I ran that company for several years. And then the company that bought us was bought by another company. And when they bought us, a year later, I left and started this, GlobalStar.
And so, how do you measure? Well, I think what I'm going to do is put a pause in that and come back and talk about from the time you started to where you are today, that 20 year.
Okay.
But I'd like to back up a little bit. And because you have a phenomenal story. And, it was several years after I had initially met you that I heard your story. And if I were to try to guess what your story was, from what I knew from you the first few years, or even from what I know of you today, it would be nothing like the story that you've told. I heard you tell your story when you were delivering a message at church. I believe that was back in 2013, maybe. And this was after you had published your first book. John is the author of 3 books. His first one is called Driven with Heart. And you gave a talk at church that day. And John, I got to tell you, I was floored. Because it's not a rags to riches story as much as it is, in my mind, a reinvention story that you did on your own, which is kind of amazing. So when I look at the subtitle of your first book, Driven with Heart, From a Dysfunctional Childhood of Survival to a Life of Balance and Prosperity, there's a lot going on there, right? And so I was wondering if you could share with our listeners and viewers insight to your childhood and your dysfunctional family situation.
Well, yeah, and this is something I'll have to probably collect myself a few times with all this, but I try not to spend a lot of time going back. I've done a lot of that work, and I continue to do it.
Right.
But I don't. I'm not a believer in dwelling in your past, but I am a believer in diving into your past, as you've read.
Oh yeah.
And healing those unresolved wounds. And back in the day, my parents both grew up in Arkansas, and I had 2 older brothers that were born in Indianapolis, Indiana. And my mother was pregnant with me. This is how the story goes. My mother was pregnant with me, and they were living in Laramie, Wyoming. And the way my dad puts it, they didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of.
Right.
So he flipped a coin to move to either Tucson, Arizona, or Dallas, Texas. And Dallas, Texas won out, so I was born in Dallas. And after I was born in Dallas, we moved fairly quickly to San Antonio, where we lived there till I was 11. But my parents, they were legally blind.
Both of them.
Both of them. My father's eyesight was worse than my mother's. When he was born, his mother had rubella and the measles, and it affected his vision. And so he had permanent scars in front of the retinas of his eyes. And as he aged, it progressed and it became worse. But then my mother, because of her situation growing up, a lot of instability around her dad. She was the oldest of two daughters, and her dad would come in and out of her life, and I think that exacerbated what was inherently a kind of a chemical imbalance in her brain. And she ended up becoming a pretty severe case of paranoid schizophrenia. And but she was highly intelligent, just like the movie,
A Beautiful Mind.
Beautiful Mind. Yeah, just like that. Highly functioning. Both of them were first generation college graduates. She went back and picked up her master's at the University of Texas in education, and with a focus on English. And she ended up teaching school at the State School for the Blind in Austin, where my dad ended up as the director for the staff for the staff for the State Commission for the Blind in Texas. So he was pretty high in position within the state, but they taught us strong work ethic. They taught us accountability, responsibility, and respect. You did not disrespect my dad.
You described him as being a John Wayne-esque character, 6'6", and which it kind of fits you as well. But so it sounds like he was a bit of an intimidating fellow. So.
He was, and my dad. The difference in my dad and the way I show up in the world or view the world is that my dad was very black and white. He didn't mince words, and he never asked you to, the way I put it, he never asked you to do anything, but he only told you once. He was militant in the way he operated. There was good and bad in that, but the bad part was he was unapproachable, and my mother had her issues, and so in a lot of ways, especially for me and my oldest brother, we both took on kind of a parental role with my mother at a very young age. And so in a lot of ways, we didn't have a childhood. You hear that about quite a few people, but we really didn't have much of a childhood. But we did learn responsibility and learn to become survivors very early on. Once I asked my brother, and I even talked about this at the church when I was delivering the message on Driven with Heart, I asked my oldest brother, I said, when you think back, because he's 4 years older than me, when you think back to when we were young, how often were mom and dad there together? How often were one of them there at a time? And how often were we there alone? He said, I would say that mom and dad were there together about 20% of the time. And 40% of the time they were there as individuals. And then the 60% of the time, we four sons were there alone in the house. So that's how we grew up. But to this day, and you saw that as well during that talk, we finally refer to ourselves as the band of brothers.
Yeah, that spoke a lot to see all your brothers there. I mean, all these years later, and that said a lot. But in your books, you talk about how, the togetherness of you and your brothers, and that's how y'all got through all those years. And, if a parent was out and about or away or you guys, you fed yourselves, but you also tell so many interesting stories about what it's like to live in a family that has two parents that are legally blind, as far as day-to-day things, going to the store, getting your, one of your parents to the bus. Because y'all had to deal with public transportation to move around, and just, even though I heard the story, you tell it, reading it I think made it that much better. And you get into a lot of detail about what that childhood looked like. And it's very, very heartbreaking at times and very inspiring. And I know that you have told me that you feel most pleased with your latest book. Your second book came out in 2017, Be the Spark, The Law of Attraction in Action. And your third book at the beginning of this year, Say Hello, The Magic of Connecting. And certainly with any writer's works, as the more they do, the more it progresses. And your third book is a really nice read. But I got to tell you, that first book just is emotional for me. I mean, just maybe again, because I had heard you tell the story, but there's something here that you wrote in Say Hello that I just wanted to read to you. It's because what I'm seeing is you, or even as a child, you talk about exploring the meaning of life, kind of questions like, who is John Davidson? Why am I here? And very introspective and very interested in finding out answers to questions, which were kind of deep meaning. And I think it gets to a point I'm going to touch on as you get a little bit older, where it's, became time to reinvent. But you say here, as time went by, I began to see things very differently. I was in the throes of overcoming my old life by rewriting my story. Over time, I began stringing together what I was learning into a beautiful life tapestry that was perfect for me. I assimilated tons of good information that I could use to manifest my new, balanced personal constitution and fulfill the new destiny I'd created for myself. I wouldn't say I was conscious of everything that was unfolding around me or through me, but I was determined and finally expected the best of my life. And I read that to my wife. I mean, I love that, how you articulated that, because earlier in your life, still as a child, while you were introspective, you lived in a tough situation. And in the book, you get into more detail, about some of the other struggles in your family, and that, if you looked and you asked your coaches or your teachers, they would say you had a pretty shitty attitude, right?
Absolutely.
Had tremendous potential, but John, your attitude sucks, kind of thing. But you got to a point, you're progressing with your life, and you tell the story of now being in college at Texas State University. It wasn't called that then, was
It was
it?
Southwest Texas State University back then.
Yeah. And so, which is now Texas State University in San Marcos.
Yes.
Right? My daughter went there.
Mm-hmm.
And you were working as a shoe salesman. And was that in Nordstrom's? Where was that?
No, it was in just a privately owned.
Okay, I couldn't remember. And you told the story of a young doctor that came to buy a pair of shoes from
That's right.
Walk us through that story, because that was really interesting.
During that moment in time, my father was really close to dying. He'd had terminal cancer for about 1.5 years, and I was pretty strung out by all that. My two oldest brothers lived in one in Houston and one in Virginia, and so they weren't around. And my younger brother was living outside of Austin as well, and I was the one that really lived here in Austin, where my father lived. And so I was going to school during that time, and I was working in the mall in this shoe store, putting in 30 hours a week and a full load of college to finish. But I was also going to see my dad a lot. And I wanted to not leave anything on the table in terms of a regret with my dad at the end. And I even wrote a little bit about this in one of the books, that, would he have been there like that? I think that I created this image, this out picturing of what my dad represented to me. And I wanted my dad to feel that role, that void for me. And so I probably tended to see my dad more favorably than some people did. And for one thing, he's my dad, right? So I always wanted that to be really special. So I was going through a lot during that time. And so when I was working in the shoe store, and what I liked about working in the shoe store, and I'd been other positions that were, you know, higher tier than that, but I was a good part-time job I could do while I was going to school. And my ex-wife had a really good job. So anyway, this guy comes in and I start talking to him and he looks at me and he says, you know, we're not talking right now by accident, don't you? And when he said that, there was a deeper knowing for me. I'd already been into a lot of the self-help and motivational type authors and speakers. I'd listened to tapes constantly, started that in 1983. And so he and I, when I went back to school, I graduated college in 91. So it was around that time frame. So it was 7, 8 years later. And he's talking to me and I'm looking at him and there was just this real connection. And so he turned me on to some Eastern culture, religion ideas in terms of book ideas. And one author in particular, Eknath Ezewarren, who's an Indian, and he wrote a book called The Upanishads. And I think that's how you pronounce it. And these guys are ancient mystics from way back, way before the Buddhists and all that. So I picked up the book and I'm reading through this book and I'm like, who writes this stuff? The articulation is through the roof. The vocabulary is through the roof. The thoughts were stretching my mind in every direction. So I'd have to read a sentence and then I'd stop and have to reread it constantly. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what do I know? I am just scratching on the surface of the iceberg here. I don't know anything. And so it really put me on a path, that moment in time. And that was probably really a God moment for me. It was just subtle, unexpected, seemingly random, but it was impactful. It changed the trajectory of my life.
I mean, that when I read that, what you just said, changing the trajectory of your life, I was like, man, that's,
yeah.
I mean, that's,
it just says you need to tune in.
Yeah.
Because it's around us all the time.
Yeah. So why don't we take a pause right now for a message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
MBD Maintenance is a proud sponsor for the Next Entrepreneur podcast, and we greatly appreciate their support. MBD Maintenance is a commercial building and maintenance contractor. They will build your commercial building, maintain it. They do additions, remodeling, tenant improvements. If you need MBD maintenance for your commercial building needs, you can find them online at mbdmaintenance.com. Okay, we're back and we're with John Davidson, the president and founder of GlobalStar Consulting. And John, you're talking about this conversation that you had with this stranger, this young MD who came in to buy a pair of shoes from you, right? And it turned out that it was a life-changing type moment. And when I think about your story, I think about there being a pivot point, that there being, what you described in your book is at times being embarrassingly impoverished as a young family, and having this bad attitude, going through life and as a young child, but there being this pivot point where you begin to reinvent yourself. And I mean, that's kind of an overused term, but I mean, really it looks like to me a complete pivot point to you. And I kind of put my finger on that as the moment, as you describe it in your writing. And you mentioned all the other reading that you had started to do, but then continued to do, Wayne Dyer and Ernest Holmes and Eckhart Tolle and others, and motivational speakers and writers as well. And that point of saying, or that realization of saying, I'm gonna find out who the best me is, and I'm gonna live it, and committing to it. And I'm fascinated with that, man, because I just I don't think that's easy. I'm not going to suggest that you did it alone. I know that you had people that you talked to and mentors and people that counseled you along the way. But um, it's a very it's a very hard thing for me to fathom doing to the degree that you did it, and so I'm really intrigued with that. Um, so I was wondering if you could, and we may have jumped a little bit out of order, but there were some other meaningful events in your family life that had happened uh, along the way, or right in that time frame. And I'm referring to your mother, and she ultimately took her life, and you were still in. How old were you at that point?
That she died the month I turned 25.
Okay, and how old were you when your father passed?
I was 33.
Okay, so your mother had died. You're a young guy, um, and so you had some you'd been through some serious um, life challenges by that point, and so is there anything that you wanted to add in about that as that relates to your story?
Um, well, with my mom, she had just gotten to where she was so extreme with her paranoia. You go out to a restaurant with her, and she'd start um, getting unnerved by a dress that a woman was wearing, or a car in the parking lot, or just really off the wall kind of stuff. And I was always someone I've always tended to be someone that tries to, probably because of my upbringing, that tries to bring order to chaotic situations. And with my mom, I was constantly trying to help her find the rationale and help her settle, and help her apply logic to any given situation. And it was the most frustrating thing, because she was just incapable of taking that on. And I was really young still, and I was trying to get her to do that. And so what happened is I ended up, I was married, and I was married in 80, and then I had a son in 82. And after he was born, we had her over. She'd come over, and when she was staying with us, had been so alone. She was a school teacher, and she decided to try to take her own life. And I found her, and she ended up going to the hospital. The ambulance came and all that. And I told her that I wasn't going to let her stay with me anymore, because I couldn't trust her not to do that again. And then over a month or two, I softened to the idea, and she came back, and then she did it again. Same thing right over again. And my younger brother, happened to be over when it happened, and he and I found her. And it was one of those, this pretty dramatic moment where I kind of pounded on her chest, reviving her. And the ambulance came, the whole sirens going, the whole 9 yards. And she survived. And then she moved down by San Antonio, in a little town called Friendswood outside of San Antonio. I was teaching down there. And my oldest brother lived in San Antonio at the time. And he tended to do a lot of the caretaking for her as well. He and I were the two main brothers that did that. And then he called me about a month after that last episode, said she was in the hospital. Somebody had found her in her apartment, and that she had tried to take her own life again. And this time she had gone. She'd been down for too long when they found her. But I did go to the hospital that evening, and she was still alert, and tracheotomy and all that going on. And I just told her I wanted her to know my son, because he was born that June and she died that September. So that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And with my dad, he ended up with terminal cancer, liver cancer. And of the four sons, my dad and I were always the closest of the sons to one another. And he would say that in the background to just me.
Oh, that's sweet.
And so I called him up one day, and I was at work, and I hadn't been able to get a hold of him. And he said that, I said, "Where have you been?" He goes, "I've been in Arkansas." I said, "Well, what were you doing up there?" And he started trying to explain it. And I kept probing because it wasn't making sense. And he said, "All right, I'm going to tell you where I've been. But if you tell anyone else or tell any of your brothers, I'll never talk to you again." And that's how my dad was. And you knew he meant it.
He meant it.
And so he told me he'd been at MD Anderson in Houston, and he found out he had cancer. And so from that point on, I was around him quite a bit. And I was in the hospital room when he passed. And that was life-changing for me, for sure.
Yeah, you told a really nice story about that in your book. So, well, thank you for sharing that. I and I'm sorry if that was uncomfortable. When you look at your whole story of your young life, and you factor in the challenges that you had, it begins to paint a clearer picture of what you had to overcome to reinvent yourself. And so thank you for sharing that. There's a part of your story where, help me remember this. You graduated from high school, and then you kind of went into the workforce, right? Before going back to college?
I was taking some classes at community college, at Austin Community College at the time, just to take on some university courses. What my goal was for one thing, I didn't have any money. My parents didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So I was working a job just to get by, to have a car, to have gas for my car, to have insurance for my car, that type of thing, food. And so what I did is I'd take classes at Austin Community College because they were cheaper, and I took everything that would transfer into a 4-year degree later. So I was able to take classes at night and that type of thing. So I was taking college courses along the way.
I see. So then you did a number of things. You worked in a grocery store. You worked as a beer salesman,
Mm-hmm.
right? You worked
Wine
as
salesman.
Wine salesman. But you got to a point where you are ready to join that startup. Can you walk us through what that looked like?
I had been, when I went back to college, after I finished college, when I went back and finished in 91, that's when I was working in the shoe store. And I liked the idea of becoming a sales rep, representing one of the brands, the shoe brands.
Yes.
There would be a lot of travel involved, and I liked the idea of that. I thought it would help me become more worldly, so to speak. And I like to go. So the idea of that was intriguing to me. It was something that I was kind of excited about. So I started working for a company called Rockport, which was a subsidiary of Reebok shoes. And there were those comfort footwear and all that. So I worked for them as a rep, and then I went to work for another company called Echo, which is out of Denmark. They're another comfort type footwear company. And I traveled a lot. I did a lot of presenting to groups of people. And that's where I learned that aspect of kind of sales and being able to present in front of people. One-on-one, no problem. When I was in the wine business, I was kind of a natural sales guy. I was the top salesman in my company in the wine business. I was the top one in the beer business, but I was more of a manager in the beer business too. Then I went back to school because I felt like my mother always wanted me to finish my college degree. College was really important to her.
Yeah.
And but she died before I ever did. And my dad died the same month that I did finish.
Right.
And I was taking 18 hours during that summer. So it's, if it hadn't have been for my parents and the work ethic they instilled in us and the hardships they had to overcome, I don't think that, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it through a lot of what we went through as kids, and come out on the other side of that. And when I looked around, now you asked how I ended up in the startup, I was traveling a lot and I was burnt out on what I was doing. I did not like the people I was working with. And what seemed to always happen to me, and it was a cycle that just kept repeating, that every time I would get to where I would hit and really exceed my numbers, sales type numbers, they would either expand my territory, bring other people in and add them to the territory, cut my percentage of commission, that type of thing. So they're only going to let me make so much money. And that always bothered me. I felt like this is the way you reward me for knocking the cover off the ball, basically. And so when my ex-wife, who I was married to 1 month shy of 35 years, she had been working for the startup, and she had been a vice president for a couple of companies. So she's a bright woman, really bright on the operations side. And they had about 12 people there. They were doing about $1 million a year in sales.
And this is the computer or
S3, the S3G company, the same ERP software implementation type company that GlobalStar is.
Right.
And what happened is I used to tell my ex-wife, yeah, they'd hire me over there. I could run circles for anybody they have, and I was so, I was pretty cocky growing up, right? When I was younger, especially, I was real competitive. And we, she'd say, yeah, I know you would. And so the next thing I know, the owner of the company wanted to talk to me. And so I sit down with him and I'm talking to him, and I think I'll write about this in Driven with Heart, but I'm talking to him and I'm thinking, I don't think I want to really do this. I don't know about this guy. I don't know about this whole thing. I don't know if I want all my eggs in one basket either. My wife and I are working for a startup. We have 2 young sons. I felt like I needed something more stable than that. And then, but then I also thought that if I were going to roll the dice on anyone, I should be able to roll the dice on myself.
Right.
And what is it if you don't believe in you, how can you expect other people to believe in you? So, and that's where this is the whole idea of believing in you. That's what caused me to make my decision to go to work there, because the owner looked at me and he goes, I believe in you. And I'd never had anyone say that to me in my entire life.
Wow.
And I thought.
But you'd also never sold software services either.
Never. I had no idea what I was doing. I never even typed on a keyboard, I don't think.
You'd been selling beer, wine, and shoes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I guess this is a reinvention part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't have any idea. I was the worst person on the computer. I wasn't a very good writer. And my ex-wife wanted me to rewrite every document. We instead of having some kind of boilerplated documents for contracts, where she wanted everyone to be written from scratch, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" So that changed. It's not very easy working with your wife or your spouse.
You told a story about being in this startup and that you're now doing sales, right? And your method of doing sales was very different from how they had been doing it prior to you showing up. And you told the story, they're kind of looking at you like, what in the world are you doing? But next thing you know, it starts to be effective. And
yeah, that's right.
Tell us about that.
That was funny. Because the salespeople they'd had that had been in there and they'd all pretty much floundered. Mike, the owner, felt like that they needed to have more of an accounting background because they were selling accounting type software solutions. Right. And my style was all about relationships.
Right.
And all about connecting with people and finding common ground and getting to a mutually beneficial end with whoever you're working with. And the kind of my philosophy on that would be that you're getting people to buy into what you're talking to them about or what you're selling them on, or you don't want them to ever feel like you're selling them. That's the key. The finesse and the really great salespeople, they're just having a conversation with you. And you're walking down a hall, and the analogy I use is they're just closing doors behind you with yes responses. And then you get to the end, you don't have to do any kind of hard close. The client closed themselves because you were, talking through it with them and giving them reasons why they should work in a partnering situation with you as a salesperson, or in my case now, a business owner.
So business grew significantly.
It did.
And which then got to the point where it became an attractive acquisition for someone.
That's right. That's right. Well,
give us an idea of the growth that y'all experienced while you were there.
Well, like I said, they were doing right at about $1 million a year in revenue.
Right.
When I joined S3G. The other thing I should probably note is the fact that when I had the positions I'd had in the past, and they continued to cut my territory or my commission structure, that type of thing, I had Mike agree to one thing. I said, I will take this under one condition, that you never cut my commission ever. And he said, well, what if you start making $1 million or more a year? I said, well, if I do, what are you going to be making? And he started laughing because I had never thought of it like that. He said, okay. And to his credit, he never tried to change it. And I had a certain percentage of the revenue, not the margins. So I had percentage of the overall revenue, which we did this meteoric growth curve rise with the company. And we hit that .com bubble. And so we went from about $1 million in sales to $30 million in sales in about 2 years.
Oh my goodness. And that short of a time?
That short of a time period, a little over 2 years. And everything that I had done up to that moment with my life had prepared me for that situation, because I was the guy driving the car and everybody else was hanging on for dear life. And it was hilarious. And when I would travel, the good thing about all the travel that I did, and I think I write about this in one of the books, that I had read an article that Bill Clinton was president at the time. And I read an article that he read a book a day. And he could just whiz through the New York Times crossword puzzles like nothing for him. He's a brilliant guy, right? So I thought, if the president can read a book a day, I can read a book a day. So I started reading a book or more. I mean, not a day, a book a week. Okay. So I started reading a book a week. And I started reading a lot of times more than a book a week. And so then I really became a big avid reader at that point in time and read hundreds and hundreds of books. But where that benefited me at S3G was that I had picked up all these ideas and quotes and that type of thing. We started putting them all over the walls, and I had a lot of them that were originals. And we have a graphic artist that ended up framing them all up. We had this whole wall, this whole hall of fame, and it was all these quotes that I had had through the years, and everybody come in, they were just, taken by the whole thing. And I loved it, and I was all into the motivational stuff. I applied those ways of thinking, those unlimited ways of thinking, and that anything is possible kind of thing, and to get excited and to let's see what we can do every day. You look at a Michael Dell or those guys. I mean, they have billions of dollars, but they still show up to work every day because they want to see what they can do. Right. So that's that. All of everything that preceded that moment in time really laid the groundwork and the foundation for being able to take that on, because it was, we saw the Peter Principle was in full swing there. We had a lot of people reaching their level of incompetency. Yeah. We ran a great company. It was absolutely just a wonderful place to work. Everybody that worked there, they loved it. And every time I'd show up on the weekends, I come in, there were people all over the place working. And because they were into what they were doing, and they did it just because of their passion for the business, and then really their love for one another.
So how many employees did they have at the end?
200.
Wow. So the that company then gets to a position to sell. You referenced that earlier in the podcast, and then you ran that company for a year or two, and then it sold again.
Right.
Right. So why don't we take a pause right there for another word from our sponsor, and we'll pick it up right when we get back. GearTrain is a national testing, inspection, and audit company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry. So these guys provide the quarterly and annual inspections, preventive maintenance, inspections, and they do testing and audits of conveyor systems and automated equipment in big distribution facilities. They support the entrepreneur's journey, and we're proud to have them as a sponsor. You can find GearTrain online at geartrainperforms.com. Okay, and we are back. We are with John Davidson, the president of GlobalStar. You've just sold out of the startup that you had great success with, and you mentioned you worked for a while with the new guys, but once that second sell went through, you left the company. Did you go right into starting GlobalStar at that point?
Basically.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add about the kind of the meteoric growth that we had, back in the day, we were recognized as the fourth fastest growing company in the city of Austin. And Austin at the time was Silicon Hills, and it'd be a tech type company and it'd be number 4 on the list. We had some serious growth going on.
Cow.
And a lot of awards were given out. We had, I had these crystal trophies and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, what was your question? I'm sorry.
So when you went to start GlobalStar, it's pretty soon after you had left. And walk us through what that startup looked like, your new company, GlobalStar, because you had left a company with 200 employees and huge revenues and great success. Tell us what week one looked like at GlobalStar.
Well, the last company that bought us, they're much bigger, multi-billion-dollar company. And I had 4 bosses in my first year. I was there a year. And so I was pretty disillusioned with the entire thing. And they were saying they wanted to do all these wonderful things with me, and that you have all this opportunity to grow, and I had no interest. I don't really care for a bigger corporate environment. I like more of a startup type of environment. And so I was ready to leave. And so and I'd also, because of the sale of the S3G, I had a windfall as part of that. So I was pretty set up. It was hard to leave in a lot of ways because I had a really hefty salary there, and I was just walking away from that. And
also you kind of lived a little bit of a rock style life. I mean, you're traveling around on private jets and, going and making presentations here and there. If I read the story right, I mean, it was a pretty enviable lifestyle.
Yeah. Mike, the owner, was really into making a lot of money and having a lot of really nice things. And, we had a private jet. He had a couple of helicopters, and he was a pilot. He flew the helicopters. So we would fly into airfields that you can't get into with the bigger jets, right? So it's kind of interesting, some of those that you would land, because we'd fly in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the airport we fly into, the jets couldn't really fly in there. And so that was really different and interesting because, you have the pilots waiting for you when you show up. You just get on the plane and you leave. And we had the same pilot all the time, for pretty much all the time. And so I knew him pretty well. And I ended up, you felt like you were kind of living pretty large, even though I didn't, and I wrote about this as well, I didn't at the end of the day really identify with that lifestyle. I think it's because of the blue collar background that I had growing up in San Antonio with my parents and all that. I just didn't want to lose myself in all of that. that opulence and, and the superficiality of that is what I felt.
Right.
I wanted to stay grounded, but it was an interesting experience, and I'm glad I went through it.
Yeah.
But
So starting Global Star,
okay,
I mean, how do you, I mean, are you able to leverage some of your previous relationships? I mean, did any of your past clients come over with you? How does that look?
yeah, I was fortunate because I didn't have any kind of a non-compete issue. They thought I did, but I didn't. Um, and so I had a few clients that really were interested in working with me. Um, and then I had consultants that were also interested in becoming a part of something else. They come to me in private and say, "Hey, if you ever decide you want to start something, let me know. I'd be interested."
Right.
So I felt encouraged by that. My ex-wife was not crazy about the idea because she said, I've always hated this business, and you really want to get back into that." And I had taken a month off, and when I restarted the company, when I restarted in this business and started Global Star, it was on my birthday in 2000, September the 7th, and it it was quite the experience because I thought, I was president of the company with 200 people. I had been through the ringer from the beginning all the way to then, and how these earn outs, algorithms that we needed to hit to earn whatever money. So I was to the wall for a couple of years, and and man, I felt like I had a piece of my soul was gone. I didn't have a lot. Did I have the energy and the wherewithal to get going again like that?
Yeah.
And gradually, as I got into things and really simplified things in terms of how we approach the business and things that were important to me and things that I had believed in through the years, I was going to make sure that we set the culture that way, and that was going to be the spirit of how we operate. So I started getting pretty excited about things at that point. But then when you come down to pick it out, and you know this from having your own business, to pick it out a name and of your business and all the little things that go along with it, I thought I had it going on, right? I had all these people working, around me, and I was running this company. It was successful, and I was there from the kind of the beginning. Boy, but starting out completely on your own, stepping off into that, it's not for the faint at heart. And had to make payroll and just all the little things that go along with it. I had to learn a lot more about the inner workings of owning a business than I knew, or I kind of didn't really have to. I had people that
Yeah.
did that.
Yep.
So that was really good for me.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, generally the same business model as what you had done previously, software consulting, and no radical changes from what you had been doing, really, isn't?
Not really. The only thing that's been different, and say that, not the only thing, but the compensation structure is different now for people. Back when at S3G, everybody was a salaried employee. At Global Star, we have varying scenarios of employment, or if people want to work as a 1099, we're much more flexible to all that now.
And how many employees do you have now?
Total count, we're about 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
We have a mixture of employees and some 1099s, and then hourly employees, that kind of thing, as part of our overall group.
Right.
You know.
So, John, there's this theme that's kind of run through your story, and it's from, you talked in your books as a young child, you're interested in, the bigger questions, and then all the reading that you had done, and the conversations that you had with certain people that were meaningful in your life. But there's this, and certainly the subject matter of your books, there's this deep theme of spirituality. And it, emanates from your personality, and it's a beautiful thing. So tell us the relevance of spirit and to you as a person, and maybe how it relates to your business. And maybe walk us through a little bit about the importance of it in your life. That's a big question. Can you sum that up?
Yeah. In one word.
Yeah.
My college background was in business. A lot of the books I read earlier on were business related and again motivational, that type of thing. And then I started getting into much more of the mystical and the not I want to say religion, but the spiritual views of the world. And what I realized is that what I learned from reading a more spiritual type of text, it was much more impactful within my life, within and outside in the external world, and so I started just just taking in as much as I could of that type of information. And my brother-in-law once said, I've read those motivational. He came off with these books. He's like, I've read one of those. I got what I needed. I said, well, I've read all these and I'm still scratching on the surface. But what dawned on me is that when you're working in a business or you're working around people, especially if you're the one who's kind of in the lead role, and I've always been a little bit of a reluctant leader in terms of a business leader because I'm not enamored with titles. I don't care for titles. I have a title because it just goes along with all the game and everything. But I don't ever refer to people as working for me. We're always working together. I love the servant mentality, servant management mentality. And so that all comes from a deep commitment to the spiritual aspects of my life, and then being able to really see people and really hear people and really connect with people. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're working with, is people. And when people know you really care about them and their interests, they'll run through walls for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so we've always had very little attrition. We have a very much a familial environment. And I think I have that story in there. If I don't, it's a good story. I should probably just tell it.
Please do.
I remember one time I met with, years ago, the CIA used to be a client of ours. And I can tell you, but I can't write it. And we implemented their HR payroll system. And that's an interesting thing because, some of their employees many of them don't exist. I couldn't go in there. I had to go in there and had to be escorted everywhere I went. I'd have to walk around with a plastic card, just had a big E on it, like I required an escort. And my people that were there as consultants, I had like 11 people on the project there, and they were all top secretly cleared. It took over a year, most of them, to get through that process, and it was murder. They'll say things like, so you have a brother? You said you have a brother that's gay. Yeah, I said that. Well, how come you were gay? So I didn't say I was gay. And they'll just keep, and they won't get off of that. They'll keep coming back to it. It's the craziest thing. But anyway, so one night I was at dinner, and I was with one of the CIOs. They had 3 CIOs at the CIA. And I was with one of their CIOs.
Chief Information Officer.
Yes. And he was really intrigued by our business. This is when I was at S3G, actually. He was intrigued because he'd seen our culture. He'd seen how nimble how nimbly we operated in the way we approached our business as a small company, and he just was fascinated with that. And so we were at dinner, we're talking, and he said, I hear you refer to your company as a familial environment, that you refer to them as a family. He goes, what's the difference between a family that you're working with and a team? Because you can't fire your family members. And I thought, okay, I've had a glass of wine here. Let's see, I've got to come up with something really intelligent sounding. I've got to get on my feet here with the CIO of the CIA. And so I said, well, the way I look at it, if you make a professional commitment to what we're doing, you're part of the team. But if you make a personal commitment to what we're doing, you're part of the family. And he looked at me and goes, wow, that's great. And I thought, wow, where'd that come from? Thank you, God. That came right through. So that was one of those, and that's how we run Global Star. And for one thing, my son, Darren, who's my business partner now, he's 33 and he's been at GlobalStar 15 years. We always made sure they worked in the company. But he's been there 15 years and he really smart on the operations side, just brilliant. He graduated summa cum laude with his MBA and he went back to night school like I did. He went back, didn't want any money from me, did it all on his own, working at GlobalStar during the week. And he came out with 14 A's and 1 B.
Holy cow.
So he killed it. And so he and I get along great. And so we run and I think a lot of the people that work with us appreciate the fact that he and I are father and son and how that there's a deeper connection and a deeper commitment to what we're doing.
So I'm going to take a stretch here, but just from reading your books and how you talk about principles, whether they're work related or life related, attitude, work ethic, taking risk, they all have like a spiritual vibe to them. And I suspect the way that you manage at GlobalStar is less, numbers and goals and more attitude and spirit and family and all, those things that certainly that you write about, but tell us what am I heading in the right direction with this? I mean, is that how you manage?
Very much. That's pretty good.
Well, it's what you write about.
It's true.
But it's not. So if you think about, you're not a minister, you're not a theologian or whatever. You're a business guy, right? And you hire and you train people, and yet the way that you write is about what's really important in life, not what's important to, make a certain salary or beat a budget or something like that. But it's really cool and it makes for good reading. But you have the experience, to write a very different type book. Certainly if it was a business book, right? You have that business experience to write a book that is more mainstream business type writing, yet your writing is very spiritually based and very much so. And so it's a nice change, number one, but it's also nice to see that you can succeed at the level that you have and do it in a way that's grounded in spirituality and the things that are most important in life. So I commend you for that.
Thank you. When I wrote I'd written the first book, Driven with Heart, and I may mention this in one of the others, but Good John Bergman, and I think Good John from our church. He's the only person I've ever met from Iceland, and he's written like 20 plus books. And I asked him, "Will you help me with my book?" And so we met at Starbucks, and I given him the transcript, and it was 77,000 words. And he took it and he read it, and we met up, and nobody had read it. My ex-wife didn't even know what it was about. And so I sat down with him. He goes, and this is why I don't write about the other part of the reason why. He said, all the leadership stuff's already been written. All the business stuff's already been written. All the motivational stuff's all out there. He goes, the only thing that makes this book or any book different is you and your perspective, looking through your eyes and using your mind and how you view the world. And he said, I think this is a great book. And he goes, I will help you with this. He goes, and he said, what I really admired about the book, and I don't mean to say that about myself, but what he admired about the book was that he felt like I really exposed myself and put myself out there with the book.
Oh, absolutely.
And that I really spoke my truth about it. And he said, you were very vulnerable.
That's exactly what it is, John.
Really?
That's exactly what it is.
And he said, you know how rare that is? And that's why he was interested in helping me. He said he usually doesn't help anybody with books.
Yeah. That's what it is. I'm so glad you said that, because that's the exact feeling that I had when I heard you speak, as I referenced at the top of the podcast. And I think the reason why I enjoyed reading about it so much more, I mean, just real and raw and vulnerable. And so look, man, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. I know we just scratched the tip of the iceberg, really. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours. And I always love talking to you, but your story truly is exceptional, John. And I don't know that I did a decent job of capturing it, but I would say that it's unlike any other story that I've witnessed or heard, in which there was this really definable situation as a young person, as a child, and this really, clear pivot point where I was referring to it earlier, but it's I had a vision in my mind almost of a seesaw. It's like, and where you reinvented yourself and you determined who you wanted to be, and you became that person. Against heavy odds, and to not only have done that successfully, but to achieve the degree of success that you have, and to be the type person that I see you as being, and up close as fellow members of our church. And it's a great story, and you're a great friend, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Really enjoyed my time with John Davidson. He is a super great guy and very successful in every measure. And as you could tell in the podcast, we barely scraped the surface of his story, but also you could tell I was intrigued by the way that John took control of reinventing himself. And I know that term is grossly overused, but when you read his story and you hear him tell it, it's really applicable in this situation. I mean, he came from a situation that was rough. He touched on several parts of it, and there's more. And the odds were definitely stacked against him, but he could look around and identify someone being successful in life, and he could say, look, if they can do it, I can do it. And he made the changes in his life, both in his education and his understanding. He did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and he built a better John Davidson from what he may have been otherwise. And so it's a really fascinating story, and he does a good job telling it. The Next Entrepreneur can be found on iHeartRadio, Apple Music, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on our YouTube channel and on Facebook. You can reach Propel Productions at propelyourstory.com. Our producer today is Daniel Segona.